Good evening. I'm Frances Jones Sneed, Professor Emeritus at Massachusetts College of Liberal Arts and a board member of Clinton Church Restoration. I'm very happy to be here this evening to moderate this panel on Leland Gantt's Rhapsody in Black. We have with us two other panelists besides Leland, and I'd like for them to introduce themselves, Olivia Enda and Jamal Ahmad. Olivia?
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Olivia Enda. I am currently a junior elementary education major, urban studies focused at Howard University. I'm born and raised in Pittsfield, Massachusetts, currently residing in the DMV, and just really excited to be part of this conversation this evening and just really honored to be amongst all of you and just have this conversation.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jamal. I'm very excited to be here as well. I am an African American studies teacher at Taconic High School, as well as the Pittsfield Public Virtual Academy. I spent a lot of time working with people in the community to bring more African American culture to the Pittsfield public school systems. And I'm just excited to be here to support everyone in this work and to spend some time with Leland to pick his brain about what is it that he presented because it was such a wonderful show.
Thank you, Olivia and Jamal. And now for Leland, I hope that you've had a chance to look at his production. And so that we'll start with some questions for Leland so that we can have some kind of context for our conversations. So Leland, at the beginning of your show, you referenced scholar Henry Louis Gates Jr., who called moments of racism scenes of instruction, quote unquote. What prompted you to assemble these particular scenes of instruction from your life?
Well, the basic idea was to present a structure throughout the play of cause and effect. So that, my idea was, people see a junkie on the street, they see a wino or an alcoholic, and that's what they see. They see this person in thrall of that medication, but oftentimes we don't take a look or we don't take the time to see or understand that that person is actually medicating something, a pain or a disappointment, something that they need some assistance in order to deal with, or they needed some way to just check out. So, to establish a rhythm of cause and effect, people can see why what they see exists. It helps to turn the diamond a little bit and let the light flash on a different facets or in different perspectives illuminated, and perhaps give you more information to you for you to adjust your filter, right, and see things in a different fashion. So that's why I brought and cobbled together these specific scenes of instruction, so as to also signposts along the way. Where is he at now? What is he dealing with now? And this is what happened, and this is what he's going through, and this is why he's going through what he is. So that was my idea behind that.
Okay, I'm sure we'll come back to some of those scenes because they really kind of impacted, um, personally for me, certain of the scenes did. And so I'm sure that we'll ask more questions about that.
Sure.
But you have a student version and an adult version of the play. So what did you imagine as your audience for this play?
Well, it might be a little flip, but I wrote the 90-minute for adults because it's chock full of sex, drugs, and rock and roll, right? And I wanted to, have these adults see this kid and, see where they are in the room to, examine within themselves how they feel about what they just saw. But the idea about disseminating it through an educational system meant that I had to cut it down to a palatable size, so it would be easier for them to present and be ingested by their students. So 60 minutes was the thing. Didn't think I could do it, but surprised myself and did. So I did that for specifically a student audience. Now, um, I thought it would be the student audience, middle school and high schoolers, and then into collegiate level, right? But I did a show in Memphis where my audience was sixth and seventh graders, and although most of it went over their heads. These 6th and 7th graders got something, you understand? So I didn't realize that my show could be for them too, right? And that's ironic. Now, also, my major audience that I was shooting for was basically white folk, because I wanted to give, a view into cause and effect, and, shine a light on this landscape that may have been, alien to folk. But I found out even after the first reading, when I read it for a brother sitting over here in the audience from Cleveland, Ohio, and a brother over here sitting in the audience from Titusville, Florida, saying, "Man, you Roberta Flack me. You singing my song." So it reflects a reality that we all know and sometimes need to be able to point at and look and say, "No, I'm not crazy. I'm not the only person experiencing this. This is real. It has, teeth." So I wanted it to be for a white audience, but there has been great repercussions in the BIPOC community as well.
Good. Thank you.
I can't tell you how nervous I am sitting down here talking to you folks. I've done a million of these things and my viscera is jumping around, jangling like, "Ooh."
We
Let
love
me
you
take a
so.
breath.
We love you so. Be cool.
Yes, I'm working there. I'm working there.
You've chosen a punchy, lively style to tell stories that are often heartrending. Um, it reminded some people of a sad lyric to an upbeat tune. But that's what the blues is all about, isn't it?
Oh,
Uh, what lies behind that choice that you chose?
well, that's a thick question. I mean, it's like the frown behind the smile. It's like the laugh that keeps you from crying, right? It's the humor that reinforces hope, right? And also, it's a structural breath, so that you have a chance to come away from the abyss, come away from the edge a little bit, chuckle, regain yourself, and be fortified for the next step in the journey. You know, it's that little bit of honey in the castor oil, to help it go down a little easier. So it's a tradition in storytelling. It's a tradition of the survival of Black people in this country. We've always had to get together and kick up our heels and laugh and hoop and holler in order to make it through the next day, make it through the night to get through the next day, because of what we see, we know we're going to have to face. So humor, laughter, that helps fortify the soul. Like I said, reinforces hope and enables you to stroll down the lane a little bit. So yeah, it was conscious choice.
Good, because I was saying it seems to me that you were basing it on the historical precedents of how most African American writers have done so is, humor as a way of getting over a message. Sometimes a message that, you put a little honey, as you say, to the really kind of pertinent kind of things that you're kind of talking about. So I think you did it well. So what are the benefits and challenges of being both playwright and performer?
Well, the biggest benefit is I don't have to ask for permission to make cuts or changes in the script. I don't need permission from the playwright. You know? That's very cool,
Yeah.
But what's the most challenging part of the whole thing was trying to find that distance from the playwright and the gulf that exists between a piece that I'd never saw before and I'm coming to it completely fresh as an actor. There's a distance that allows me a greater degree of intimacy with that piece. I don't have to overcome a lot of different things just to get into the piece. So I had to overcome what it is I think I'm saying. I put the pen down, I've written it, I know what I've said, I've said it, I'm happy with what I said, and now I have to tell you, which means I have to gain a deeper understanding of what it is I said so I can deliver it in a visceral fashion. Now that means, like I said, I have to approach it like I didn't write it. And since I never really had a rehearsal process, most people have 2-3 weeks of rehearsal, couple of weeks of previews, and then, they get to figure out what's happening. Every time I did a show, that was my rehearsal. So all the information I got from that show was used for the next rehearsal. So, it was, it It was
So
very
you've done
interesting.
some, you've done some revisions between first performance and now.
Oh, absolutely. There've been a couple of revisions, but they were all in tune with what's happening in the zeitgeist. Like now, I inserted at the very beginning that this is a time when people are publishing their calls to action and statements of conscience, but do they really know what it is they're promising?
Mhm.
You know, um, what is that? Do you really know what it is you're promising to do?
Yes.
And then further along in the section of racial profiling, I have the roll call, the
Mhm.
litany, and the recognition that, but for the grace of God, go I. You
Mhm.
know, any person of color walking out the door, it could be faced with that moment. You know what I mean? So,
Good. At one point in the play, you said, as a Black man in America, I am always on probation, quote unquote. And there are multiple examples of your having to maintain your self-control under extraordinarily trying circumstances. Could you say more about that?
yeah, I'm gonna read this because I wrote it down. It was important. I mean, Black people can be canceled at any time, right? For saying the wrong thing, for saying the right thing at the wrong time, or saying it too loudly or with too much passion, or for saying anything at all in the first place. Cancellation means fired from a job, expelled from university, character assassination, incarceration, or death. As I just said, it can happen to you at any time. Just by virtue of the packaging that you were born into, you have to face a gauntlet and a challenge to your very existence every day. You know, I remember seeing a video. I've seen a couple of videos actually in the past couple of years of white men, young white men, being held down, wrestled by multiple police officers. And each time, these two videos, the one guy, beat the officers down, got into their car, and drove away unscathed. In another one, he's in the police station with 3 or 4 police officers all over him wrestling. He grabs the police officer's gun, shoots him, and he's still on the count. Now you juxtapose that against a brother who's sitting in a gas station, not moving, getting stopped for a traffic violation, and goes to reach for his license that has been demanded, and now he's dead. As a Black man in America, I'm always on probation because I don't have no room to move, right? Because my next step, well, it's been said, as a Black man, I got one foot in the grave and the other foot on the banana peel. I just said I'm on probation.
I think you're at the start of a new production there.
The Banana Peel Diaries. Let's go for it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yes. Last question for me before we get some responses from Jamal and Olivia. I can't not let you go without talking about our great Barrington's native son, W.E.B. Du Bois, who once said, quote, "I do not care a damn for any art that is not used for propaganda," unquote. What do you think of that? Does that connect with your play in any way?
Yeah, we agree wholeheartedly. It connects most directly with my play, with the exception of the word propaganda. Okay. Now, propaganda at the time meant, I think, I would hope, a little bit different. It means now. Now propaganda is a depiction of a group think in the worst possible way. You know, but what I think he's talking about is the same thing that's been echoed by Nina Simone. It's the duty of an artist to be an activist.
Mhm.
I think it's like what James Baldwin says: artists are here to disturb the peace, right? So it's our requisite as an artist to tell the truth and provide a perspective that the dominant culture may not be that much aware of. And again, in order to realign their thinking, in order for them to, re-examine their filter. So they have a different weight on the information they get, and hopefully that'll give us a different result in, the reactions that they get to the information, right?
Yeah, thank you. Um, Olivia, do you want to, I'd like for you and Jamal now to first just talk about what you took away when you saw the play. And then each of you can ask Leland one question right now. And we'll have more questions later, okay? So Olivia, do you want to begin this?
Course, of course. So again, just so happy to be here and be able to have this conversation in general. But just yeah, just after I had to really just sit for a minute and really just take it all in and really just reflect on how familiar it was, but how chillingly unique and how you made it your own and made it your own truth. And I found that very interesting, as you had just mentioned, the whole idea of cause and effect and that whole products of environment and how that really just encompasses who you were or who you are or who this character became. And it really just came down to like me having this epiphany of the validity of that truth. And like it really just depends on who is the audience or who is listening and who is willing to listen and determine what their takeaway is on that. And I feel like that is just such a like parallel to being a Black man, being a Black person in general, is like everyone around you is trying to validate, who you are, where your perspective lies. And it was very interesting to see how like that story was able to transgress into a self-reflection, kind of like pushing away that outside, this is what I'm supposed to be, and not having that or not necessarily being a product of your environment or not necessarily being an effect or a cause or an influence, but rather just really understanding like it's not your fault that you were born Black, and just kind of taking advantage of that opportunity rather than seeing as like a downfall. But so much more, I don't want to ramble on too hard, but it was just very powerful and just so much to connect on. But actually my main question was going to be like so somewhat already answered, but like that validity of truth idea again, and seeing like how has this story, this one man show, how have you seen the audiences, the variation of audience response kind of parallel back into your reflection of what the story you're trying to project was, if that makes sense?
Um, I just read a track question and your question went right out of my head. So say it again.
So how basically, I'm going to simplify a little bit, but how has the variation of audiences, so whether it's children, adults, whites, Blacks, how has their response to the content kind of affected what you initially thought or what you initially wanted the message to be?
Man, I have found that I have been saying, thank you, you got it. Success, you got it. To all the folk, man, white, Black, young, old. I mean, they get the themes, the other, self-reflection, self-examination, self-determination, because, yeah, we are all cause and effect. We all are, I like to say if racism is a tea bag, we've been swimming in it our entire lives, all of us. So how could we not be affected? I mean, we are what we eat. I mean, our environment is reflected in, in our viscera every day. So how could racism not be a part of our everyday life? It's part of the entire fabric of this country. It's the basis, the soup in which the petri dish that this country grew out of, So that's it's important to know that and continue to speak about that. Ringing the bell of truth is like kicking truth and telling the truth is it rings that moment that spot in everybody that I like to call the bell of truth. It's so closely associated with one's humanity. We're all human, and we all know what's real. We all know what's right and wrong. We don't need some biblical tome, some religious manuscript to tell us that. We need to be reminded often, but ultimately we know. And by telling the truth honestly, unvarnished, it rings that bell. So what people walk away with, whether they want to acknowledge it or not, is that they've just seen truth. They've just experienced that truth. And now they have to deal with how that truth is going to echo in their psyche, how that truth is going to manifest in their lives. And, if you're a human being, Cheney hated gay people until he realized his daughter was gay. A guy named Daryl Davis has a closet full of Klan robes because he disabused them of their perspective of Black people, and they could no longer continue under that present ethos. I mean, yeah. I know I've been very verbose, but I hope I answered your question.
Oh, yes, yes, yes.
Jamal?
All right, Leland, man, it's, such a great place. What I immediately came to think about in my studies right now, what happens is that I'll get a bunch of African American students to sign up for my course, but then I also get other students of color who aren't Black to sign up for my course simply because it's not white. And what that led me to then investigate was this idea of intersectionality and these shared traumas. And when we think about shared traumas, I think one of the ones that are prevalent right now is what's happening with the Asian American community. So I've been connecting with some Asian American students at MCLA's campus, and we had this conversation about sharing our truths as you're discussing, and how sometimes it can be so traumatic that you don't know if you got everything across or if it sounds believable because it's so shocking to the majority, or you don't know if you want to do it again. And as I was talking to these students, I reflected on the things that I use in my class, and I thought about, well, it is traumatic and it's painful and it hurts, and you want to avoid that because there are some lessons I have that physically take a toll on me to teach. And what I think about now that I'm in a space where I get to be around more people, like the people on this panel, the people at this table, is that the more I reflect and share on that trauma, the closer I get to telling an accurate story for the person who really needs to hear it. So when I think about your show, I was just like, wow, this is like what I'm trying to do times 100. Like, just really get into that space where I can catalog everything from the beginning to the end and do so succinctly and have it all interconnected. The way that you talked about drug use and violence as a young person just because of the lack that you saw in the community and how that was available. The piece that really got me was this thing where you went to the PTA meeting and you were talking to the well-meaning white parents. Woof, what just made me come to this thought that, like, wow, a lot of what you're doing with this play must be similar to reliving that moment at the PTA where you have to interact with some people who may not understand you, who want to help, and in the process of trying to help you, they cut you because you're trying to bring them to something that they probably haven't looked at before. So I think I'm coming down to all this to say that, like, I applaud you for being so vulnerable and powerful within that vulnerability, because I think our world, especially people in American culture, we all need to see that, just as you said, like singing my song so that, we don't feel alone. But that brings me to my question. When thinking about the truth and trauma and thinking about how it hurts to reopen those wounds, but you're telling it, uh, are there stories? And I feel bad because this is just one of the questions that I have that I want to ask, but I think this is the best one for right now. Are there stories that you either added or omitted from your one-man play to make it work better? And if so, what was the thing? What caused you to do that?
Yes, not everything in my life is in the play. And there is a certain fictionalized quality because the women are amalgamations of the women in my life. the woman who left me because I was an alcoholic is not the woman in the show, is not the woman who actually did that. You know, the woman I had the affair with, lost my virginity to, that I talked about as a real woman, but that's not her name. And where the first event was is not in the hospital, but was at her house. So, you know, you take dramatic license in order to tell the story in a way that smooths out the bumps in the road so that you can make the point. It's called, you know, a fictionalized autobiography, right? Not to mention the fact that memory is a funny thing. You know, I'm well over. I'm not 10 years old no more. So going back to how I was thinking and feeling at 10 years old, the things that were really traumatic, those are the ones that are more easily accessible, but maybe the ancillary characters and events, maybe the collateral damage is a little fuzzy, a little hazy. So you use dramatic license to fill in and write through the interstices in order to make the plot work. So yeah, now the bottom line is, every incident, every event of the play is absolutely true. Those things absolutely happen, right? So, as the creator of this child, um, I reserve the right to dress him, her, it any way I'd like. So,
Thank you, Olivia and Jamal, for those takeaways. Now, I'm going to go to the audience, and I think we have a couple of questions from the audience. And I would ask the audiences, if you have a question for Leland or from anybody on the panel, please put it in the chat function at the bottom of your screen so that we can do it. Francine Weinberg asked, are you comfortable or uncomfortable if viewers see your character not only as you, but as every Black man?
see, now, um, the first part of my play, I take great pains to have people see this kid as a kid, not a Black kid, just kid, you know, a child. Everybody has feelings about children. When we start thinking about packaging, then those feelings get a little warped or twisted. But if you can see young Leland as a kid, then you are now connecting to the humanity of all people. I want to be a human being, and that makes me one with all human beings. The discussion is this what happens in this country to a human being who happens to be Black. Now, does that make me every Black man? No, it makes me emblematic. It makes me a paradigm of every Black man. It gives me an opportunity to illustrate things that happen to me that are universal to the existence of Black people in this country. So, I mean, what I want people to see me as is a human being. And what I want people to do is deal with the fact of whether or not they can or cannot do that. If the inhibition of my packaging makes it impossible for them to see me as a human being. And when they come to that conclusion and say, yeah, then I want them to take the next step and say, well, why is that? So, am I comfortable or uncomfortable with being an every Black man? Yeah, because I'm not every Black man. I'm every man. I'm every human being. And that's what I present. And that's what I'd like the takeaway to be. And not just, I present a singular individual, that's redundant, as a paradigm to represent a greater reality. I think that's the best way I can answer that question.
Okay, thank you. Robert Hessler asked, do you feel, how do you feel about the intersection of class and race in America? Is there a basis for a, Robert, you didn't finish that. Um, is there a basis for a genuine common ground in the fight against racism, considering the issue of quote unquote white privilege?
Why y'all want to ask these questions that take 16 years to answer? What's up? That's a 20-year discussion right there. Look, have you guys read the book Caste, Isabel Wilkerson? Go out, buy it, read it today. Don't wait. You talk about the intersectionality of caste and class and race. And reading this book was the first best understanding I gleaned from about how this crap started, where this stuff is sitting, how it was fomented. You read that in conjunction with Ibram X. Kendi's book, Stand from the Beginning, and you get a history lesson that gives you many of the things you would want to know, and then you add some salt with Jennifer Eberhardt's book, Biased, and you get the underpinnings of all this stuff. People have to understand white privilege. The epitome of white privilege is being able to walk through a store and not be followed by the cashier afraid that you're going to steal something. While that other white person in the store who does not garner that much attention robs the store owner blind. So, I mean, is there common ground for the fight to recognize white privilege? My wife and I have this conversation all the time. White privilege is embedded in unconscious bias. And it's hard to point it out. It's hard to make people realize or see it because it's unconscious. So to tell people, yeah, you crazy because you don't understand that you are benefiting from something that you can't feel, see, or touch. But they see it, they feel it, and touch it every day. And don't understand that what we call it a privilege because we don't have that right. We can't stroll through the world like that. So that is a privilege that you have that I do not. But you don't see it as a privilege. You see it as normal. You see it as every day. And it's very difficult to break that paradigm of perspective. It's very difficult to show someone that their entire structure of filter is based upon a lie that has been amplified and reiterated and promulgated for hundreds and hundreds of years. If Black people were ignorant and stupid, then how could America get to the moon without those Black women? First open heart surgeon was a Black man. We got W.E.B. Du Bois. We got people who have shattered that inhibitive paradigm in every walk of American world life, and yet we're still seen as less than. We still carry the stigma of not good enough. We can walk away and establish a society for ourselves and excel and don't need the white gaze, can you say Tulsa, Oklahoma, and can't have that because you can't have any semblance of Black privilege. You can't have any semblance of identity and agency. The best thing to do is to study your history, not American history, because we don't have that. Because why? There's no Japanese or Korean or Indian history. Jimmy Baldwin says it's a hell of a thing to be sitting down there, rooting for Gary Cooper when he killing the Indians, and you don't realize that you the Indians. It's a hell of a thing. that's got to be a mirror cracking experience. Or the fact that you have been killing these. Oh man, the play on Broadway, the slave play. I saw this piece. It took my head off like that jet whatever commercial. Knocked it off. Black woman said, you Europeans come over to America and you just committed genocide, by stepping on this continent. You infected the whole continent with smallpox. You just killed everybody you came in contact with. You're a virus. You're a disease. That's a hell of a perspective, isn't it? Now, the paradigm of that perspective is you didn't do it on purpose. You had no idea that this is what was going to happen. You're just issuing through with what it is you want to do, but without any knowledge or thought about the impact your actions might be having. Check yourself. Look at yourself. Oftentimes I say to people, you do something and you just stroll on. But if you take a moment to look back at your wake, you'll be surprised what's back there. You'll be surprised with what you have wrought. Some of that surprise will be positive. Often that surprise is negative. But you got to check yourself and look back at your wake and educate yourself to the reality of things. And don't be so arrogant as to suppose that with your limited worldview, that you know everything there is to know. Because the American history that's been taught in this country leaves out too many damn Americans, man. It just leaves out too many Americans.
Thank you, Leland. I think that we got him started with that question. Um, Brian Harrison asked, did you perform the play all in one session or did you take breaks and merge the scenes?
Both. I had to stop on occasion because of whatever reason. But my goal was to run through the show, top to bottom, and do it twice. I mean, we had 3 cameras. We shot it twice, so that gives me a 6-camera thing to give more information to be edited into the whole. Now, I got to give a big up and a big shout out, and the editor, Sarah Gilman. She's a close personal friend of mine. She was nominated for an Academy Award with her own documentary piece about her own life and experience. I mean, the girl got chopped. She's BAD. Okay, she was able to capture the kinetic value of the live show in her video. So a lot of what you see and the success thereof lies in the hands of Sarah Gilman. She's a whale of an editor. Now look, no matter what you do, if the marble ain't good, it's not going to come out as good as you want. So the show is the show, but how that was handled and presented, got to give her kudos. It's incredible.
Okay, Marianne Young asked, do you experience that members of your audience do take away that you are portraying every man? Do you get that feeling? I just lost it. I'm sorry, Mary. Do you get the feedback and reaction that you've been and are hoping for?
When people tell me that they're grokking with one of the themes of my show, if one of the many prongs of this conversation touches them, I have had that experience after every show, after every single show. This show touches people. It does. I'm amazed at, I wrote it and I wanted it to happen, but I'm amazed at the reactions I get. They're not thinking about, oh man, he was presenting every man and it's all an intellectual, exercise and we can sit and articulate and, have a couple of, cups of tea and smoke a cigar and intellectually, chatter. No, they're coming from a visceral place. They're coming from their gut and their heart. They're not coming from their head. So the verbiage they use does not, extend into every man and all of this. No, you know, I felt what you're saying. I understand what you're saying. What you're saying, you're talking about me, you know. I don't know how I can answer that any better than that.
Okay, that's great. Alan Brindell asked, there are always a few lines in a play that hit seriously, impact me in the moment, and that stays with me after the play. One of those lines was that white people rarely have an experience of having a conversation with more than one Black person at a time. What a great truth. How did that come to you?
Well, being that raisin in the rice pudding, you look around, you find yourself not being replicated in certain areas of society. So the raisin in the rice pudding that the other, most white folk, man, one of the first shows I did on the road was up in New Hampshire, Winnipesaukee, right? Up there by Winnipesaukee Lake. Now you're talking raisin in the rice pudding, man. There's very few people of color up there in those environs, There's very few people in total in Maine, Massachusetts, Vermont, Rhode Island, so we're not represented to the same extent the NBA is in Black people in these areas, so you can't help but talk about it and reflect that reality. The raisin in the rice pudding is real and mm.
Okay. Um, I don't see any more questions from the audience. I'm sure they probably will, but I know Jamal is always rearing to ask a question. And then we'll have Olivia ask a question um, and then we'll come back for a wrap up. Jamal?
It's so funny. I'm over here working, I'm crafting this question right now. So I think I got it though. I wrote it into the chat but didn't send it. So here, let me just put it in so it's bigger so I can see it. There were two quotes in the last third of the play that really stuck with me. And then you took a turn and I was like, whoa. But let me try to put it here. So you said you were talking to your friend who was part of La Familia, I believe. You said, if I don't embrace being a Black man, then who will? When he was like, oh, you're so focused on being a Black man before anything else. And then there was this, seek and you shall find. And if you don't find it, put it there. So as we're thinking about this thing with, this virus that's racism, and we think about moving forward and being every man, I'm just thinking about how in the play you dealt with this at different stages in your life. When you were younger, it was sex, drugs, and liquor, and some violence. And at present, it's theater and discourse. So my question is, do you feel that uh, people who are exploring their own racial identities have to go through a stage that is violent, either because of their communities or because of who they're around, or self-inflicted violence, in order to come to a conclusion? Or is there something that they can do prior? Is that violence like part of everyone's story, or is it something that they will experience, regardless of what position they place themselves in?
I don't think it necessarily has to be violence, and those medications have to be part of everybody's journey. Everybody's journey is going to be specific and uh, to that person. Uh, there is something that came to my mind when you finished the question, was like, come on, ask Meghan Markle. No matter where you go, there you are, right? I mean, Diana experienced a lot of the same things that Megan did because of class, but they never said Diana's baby was never going to have security. They never said Diana's baby, what color is it going to be and how is that going to best represent us? Diana, didn't, if she had any problems with mental illness and difficulty in dealing with her situation and wanted to have someone help her with, she, that's she didn't have to deal with that. you know uh Everybody is going to go through this journey and deal with what they deal with in their own way. I mean, my choices were a result of where I started, and that's what the whole journey was: running around trying to survive long enough to find different choices so I can make different choices, because somehow I knew that you make the right choice and that puts you in a hallway with other doors, which are other choices, right? And I needed to find more choices. And the violence that I experienced, that I had to go through, that I saw committed, that I did upon myself, were all the paroxysms of this attempt to find more choices, this drive to survive and get away from what I knew to be a killing experience. I had to get out of the ghetto or I was going to die there. I left Pittsburgh for New York because I was too afraid to stay, because I thought I was going to die there. I changed my money gig from waiting tables to massage therapy because I thought my acting career was going to die if I didn't, because I needed to change how I was dealing with it. And in effect, I killed my acting career in one sense, but then by making those choices, I became a better actor than I ever could have imagined myself to be. Right. So as far as me and my journey, and I can only speak with any veracity about that, is that it was a constant quest for survival and finding, uh, manufacturing rocks to turn over to look for choices that would enable me to survive to the next day. I mean, I read a story in the Times this morning about somebody was talking about how their parents had been killed in the concentration camps, and the question was, well, how did you survive? And this person felt that if they, kept themselves looking good, if they took care of themselves, they sold their rations and they traded their rations, their food, for better fitting clothes. They made sure, even though it was like freezing, that they washed themselves every day so they would not, have that. I mean, this person's whole ethos was in his presentation. We talk about presentation, right? In his presentation to the guards, to make them feel like he felt he was worthy. So that reflection would allow him to survive another day. I mean, human beings will do a plethora of things to survive another day. And, because of where we are, because of the caste, class, mudsill position in our society that we have been relegated to, oftentimes we have no choice but to deal with the violence to ourselves that we commit and that is perpetrated upon us. You know, does everybody go through this? No. I did a show, a talk back with a group of teachers up at in Ulster County in New York, and one of the teachers told me that they had a biracial child in her class who's saying, "What's all this stuff about racism, man? I don't get it." My nephew, my brother's youngest son, you know, is so fair-skinned, lives in Ohio. He's presently attending Dayton University. Is so fair-skinned, he had to tell people he was Black before anybody would ever know. I gave him my copy of Ta-Nehisi Coates. I don't know what you're living, but this is where you are. Okay. And he subsequently has told me that the mirror cracked when they realized he was Black.
Okay, we go to Olivia now. Olivia?
Yes. So I also been trying to reword this question and kind of add on and take away based on your responses to some of these previous questions. But initially, as a Black woman or going into one, I had to ask, or had to at least bring up this conversation or a mini conversation in itself, how I host a different narrative. Within the Black narrative in itself. And it was discussed like how intersectionality and identity through privileges can be deconstructed into specifically addressed within this play, appearance and sexuality. So I just was wondering like how you felt you may or may not have addressed the side of a woman or Black woman specifically versus your take as a Black man.
um, I didn't. I did not set out to address the vagaries of being a Black woman in this society, because I'd be talking out my hat. I got to write about stuff I know, and my desire was to make it as universal a situation as possible, that regardless of your gender, sex, or creed, you could get something out of it that reverberates, that echoes with your reality. You know, Black women and Black men have similar, if not often precisely the same experiences with racism in this country. I mean, we both get followed around the store. We both have to, get lockjaw trying not to say the wrong thing to the boss. We both have to. I don't necessarily, depending on the nature of my boss, that happens to be a female. I'm not necessarily going to have to be concerned about being harassed sexually. I say not necessarily because it doesn't necessarily mean it's not going to happen. It's just in our society, at least it's publicized less often. You know, um, I can't speak for the plight of women or Black women. I can only try to speak for the plight we share. So I'm not trying to get it twisted and trying to to present myself as something I'm not, or say that it was beneath my notice or unworthy of my attention. That's not what it's about at all. I would not do a disservice or insult that subject matter by handling it from a poor and ignorant position.
Thank you, Olivia. That was a great question and one that I was going to bring up had you not, but thought that was a great question. I was actually going to quiz him about the Black mother more.
Y'all gonna maybe say something to piss people off in a minute, see?
Well, Leland, I'll leave that question to the after talk, okay?
Okay.
Our last question from the audience is going to be Michael Abasahan. Hi, Michael. Thank you all for being here and having this conversation with us today. My question is for Leland and the panelists. You have to engage with the trauma in Black history to make your work authentic and transparent, especially to remain true to the history. It does take a toll on you mentally and physically. How do you cope? What do you do to recharge, to continue to create plays and teach in this manner?
It's been my career as an actor that has afforded me the most information about the history of this country. Researching roles and time periods. I did not know the prevalence of Black soldiers being hung by being falsely accused of rape in this country and in bivouacked overseas, especially in England, before I did The Affair and was a soldier in 1945 in the Second World War, and having my best buddy be accused of that. And it was, emblematic of things that were happening all the time. It was my research on attempting to do Leroy Jones in a play off Broadway and have him talk about Black Wall Street in Tulsa, Oklahoma, which I had heard about but never really knew anything about, that took me to understanding what that was all about. And it infuriates me. Okay. It stokes an anger and a fury and a rage first. And then when I have embraced all of that to the extent that I can control it and not have it control me, I pour it into my artistic instrument and use that as a conduit and use my voice in that fashion. That enables me to continue to stroll. That enables me to feel as though I'm doing something, that I'm not hopeless, that it's not hopeless, that I could have an effect on something, that, hell, I'm doing something. And when you do something and you see the reaction to what it is you've done, sometimes people will scream at you in anger and I touched the nerve. Let me keep digging here for a minute. Because that's what you want. You want to get their attention. It's The more I read and learn about the history of this country, the more challenging it is to maintain my ethos of just wanting to start a conversation, because it impels me to violence. It puts Muir Woods trees on my bonfire and threatens to consume me in rage. How do I get through it? By writing it down right now, by portraying these characters and purveying their truth. This is my lane. This is where I can have the most effect. This is what I advise people to do, to try to be a white blood cell and kill that sucker from your lane. Use the tools that you have at your disposal from your lane. White folks, if you see something, say something. I mean, don't get stupid, because you might get that one that's going to hit you in the head for saying something. But if it's just somebody who has a knee-jerk reaction to your compassionate outreach, take a breath and understand that maybe you stepped on somebody's button, and give them the benefit of the doubt. Just because you don't know them, just because you don't know many black people, you know people. So treat a person like a person, and you'd be surprised how much people interaction you can have. I'm gonna stop there.
It's very interesting. Was that Siren in Pittsfield or Washington, D.C.? I'm gonna let Olivia and Jamal respond to that question about, how do you deal with that, but also talk just a few minutes about the way that you have navigated race in your life, and of course I know it's going to be different from Leland's point of view, but I mean that's the reason why we kind of assembled this panel, kind of a generational panel here. Olivia as a junior in college and Jamal as the next young upstart, and then Leland and me, so tell us a little bit about your journey on this road from race, because I think, we talk to Olivia is always called on all the time, to speak for Black Pittsfieldians in her way. And Olivia, tell us a little bit about yourself and how you approach it.
Okay, well, it's just such a journey. Like literally just reflecting, I just recently turned 21. And so it's been a lot of stepping into this new chapter while also taking and encompassing all that I've been through. But hindering all the way back to Pittsfield, and kind of reflecting on what it means to be, generational. I'm a first generation American in terms of my mom and dad both being Ghanaian immigrants and having Ivorian influence in their education, and coming to New York with that typical stereotypical immigrant story with like $20 in their pocket and making the most of their life as they could. I have an older brother who went to Taconic, and his perspective of life is so different from mine, and it really came down to education and how we found that importance in education, or that difference in importance rather. But going to Egremont Elementary School, and being all throughout my whole elementary matriculation, the only Black person, the only dark-skinned girl with braids and glasses, and not seeing anyone who even remotely looked like me or remotely had an identity or perspective of mine. I surprisingly just ignored it, because I just, like, no one wanted to have that conversation with me, so I didn't even seek out that conversation of what it meant to be different, because I was like almost fearful of what that turnout could be, or what that outcome of my life could be if I really truly accepted in that moment as a 10-year-old not being the same. So I just kind of did my best to blend in, but everyone who knows me, I'm not one to really blend in terms of my outbursts and maybe sometimes a little too fresh commentary, but it was just really a journey of finding myself and not really finding who I was or really claiming my Blackness until probably high school. Um, when I was in an environment that was a little bit more diverse, but also acknowledging that I'm it. Like I know who I am, and it's like for the longest, people kind of wanted to downplay what it meant to be of African descent, or kind of having that anxiousness of being like the token Black person in the classroom and being pointed at, and kind of like even from like a teacher perspective, almost having like a responsibility to educate my white peers or the white stakeholders within the classroom, whether that be a teacher or an administrator or someone who's just in the classroom at the time, who again looks nothing like me or has nothing um, in common with me, but also just acknowledging again that it's one, not my responsibility, but two, if I'm going to speak, I'm going to know what I'm talking about and you're going to listen to me type thing, you know? If you really want to know my perspective, like it's not your fault, but we're kind of in a result of like a whole kind of going back to like whole cause and effect type thing in that differences of perspective. Um, and I just really took that and ran with it. Really, by the time I was a sophomore in high school, I was like, if you guys want me to be a token, I'm going to utilize that to every extent. And really just I tried to be involved, and that's really where I started to like be involved in community activism and kind of tying with a variety of different nonprofits and Multicultural Bridge and Rope and all those great facets of and community leaders back in Pittsfield. But ultimately that led me to an HBCU because I was tired of being that token Black person and kind of ready to be part of a diaspora that I knew kind of had that multifaceted intersectionality of the Black perspective amongst the African diaspora, amongst the Black diaspora. But yeah, it's just been quite a journey, still really solid in who I am now. And unfortunately, it took until high school to really like claim it as even like a reflection of this one man show, kind of at the end of it being like, it is what it is, and I love it here. I love being Black so much. Like there's nothing short of it. But when it comes to now being a pre-service educator, and my lofty goals of being in education administration and wanting to kind of make that impact and hopefully never, at least under my eye, have a Black student, a little Black girl, a little Black boy feel anxious when it comes, you know, February 1st rolls around and they have to watch those videos and being that token person in the classroom. Taking that step back and again, like really knowing what I'm talking about and really acknowledging that it is heavy. It is a lot of history that doesn't necessarily start in this country, and really bringing out the good of what it means, like that Black joy, that Black resilience, that Black hope. And I feel like that's what really kind of gave me momentum, especially this summer with all that was going on. Like there's good in being Black. Like I said, I love it here. And sometimes like it is really heavy, but just that alternating perspective of just how deep the lineage goes. And for me personally, it's a little bit more connected. Again, like as I'm saying, I am the daughter of two immigrant parents, and I've even been to Ghana and Africa myself, but just understanding that there's so much history and so much hope and so much resilience and so much positive encompasses of being Black, that really is just, that's my sense of relief. Like that is the narrative that I want to spew out to my future students and spew out to anyone that really listens to me. And y'all know who've heard me before, I can talk on for days. So let's zip it there. I'm gonna zip it there.
Okay, Jamal, follow that.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, I don't know how to follow that. All the hope wrapped up into that, being at an HBCU after being out of place for so long and trying to acknowledge what people are subjecting you while finding your own way, it's tough. You know, similar to both you, Olivia and Leland, is that growing up multiracial in a Black community is that I was never Black enough. I was always the Oreo. I was always the Carlton. And it wasn't really until I got to college out here in the Berkshires where everyone was white and I was as black as midnight to all of them. Like, I was like, whoa, what is this? So for me, just, going back to Michael Obasahan's question and following up Leland's and Olivia's comments, is that it was also creation that did it for me. I've always felt most comfortable in the classroom. I've always felt most comfortable learning and, doing those things. That's where I felt home. Unfortunately, growing up, uh, being an advocate or an enthusiast for education also meant being white adjacent. So for me, in this space that I am now as a teacher, I try to really dig into this idea that Blackness is a spectrum. And I try to demonstrate that for my students. We look at a bunch of different things. And over the process of doing that research and presenting that information and creating different lessons really helps me to cope with what I'm feeling. Because what I realized just over the pandemic, actually, because I don't know about y'all, the one that got me the most, there was two of them, three actually, Ahmaud Arbery, um, Kurt Reinhold, and Rodney Reese. Rodney Reese didn't die, but it really messed me up. Those three really just moved me to tears because I'm in a predominantly white neighborhood and I run in my neighborhood, or like I walk around my neighborhood, and it just made me so afraid about the idea that, like Leland, you can leave the space where the violence is prominent so that you can better yourself and try to make something different, and the violence will find you. And it's like, you can't ignore it. So I just let myself feel it. So it's like, all right, well, I know this is going to be a thing. Let me acknowledge it when it come by. Really understanding the fact that I'm not safe in any situation. And I think once I really came to that understanding, but I've learned to use education to develop a sense of protection for myself, as well as young people who are like Olivia, who probably haven't had that representation or are totally isolated until they come to my class. Is that now that we have built this community, now that we have all invested into each other, is that that's energizing. That's bringing us back. And just to comment on the creation one, some things was hard is sometimes I make terrible stuff, but I got to make the terrible stuff to get to the good stuff. And it's about giving myself the grace and the mercy to understand that I'm on a journey and that I am part of the process and I'm going to make mistakes along the way. And I just have to remember that because Blackness is a spectrum and because living and these emotions you get are also a spectrum, is that you're going to be in a different place every time you take an assessment. Every time that you reflect, you're going to be in a different spot. And it's just about trying to be better and more kind and loving and forgiving to yourself. And honestly, Leah, what I'm thinking from the end of your play is also to those around you by having this conversation, which can be hard because we know these last couple of years have been taxing in terms of discourse. Is that that's what it is. You create the community, you create with each other, you give yourself space to feel, and you don't apologize for how you feel. You acknowledge it, and then you move on. And as Ibram X. Kendi said in How to Be Anti-Racist, you do something. You don't just share ideas. You don't just talk about it. You be about it. So that's how I cope. That's how I re-energize, and that's what I'm doing. And being here is an example of that.
Thank you, Jamal.
My brother.
And Olivia. Thank you, Leland. This has been a wonderful evening of conversation, and especially delving more into your gray matter, Leland, about the thoughts behind the play itself. I think helps people understand it more. So I'm going to give it back to the main control now to round us out. But thank you again, everyone.